How's it going, everyone? Tim here, TRD Adventures. Hope everyone's all well there. As always, thanks for tuning in. Much appreciated. All right, so we're getting the ball rolling on the new SORRCA videos. We just dropped the Class 1 video. Went through a pretty good breakdown with what was changed, what's current, and how to proceed with making your measurements and stuff like that. And honestly, from Class 1 into Class 2 and then to Class 3 shortly following, it gets even easier, honestly. A lot of the same concepts, a little more opened up because we're going with a more performing class. Again, I know everyone's tired of this, but down below in the description, I will have linked to the SORRCA Facebook page as well as the OneDrive files for the most current SORRCA rule set, as well as the diagrams. The new rules are a living rule set, which means they can change at any given point in time. As always, make sure you have the most current rule set available and in front of you when you are doing your build, because some things very well may have changed and you don't want to build out of spec, stuff like that. We're going to be taking a deeper dive into Class 2 with this episode. And again, I will be following through with basically strictly the Class 2 section minus a couple of the pages. In the SORRCA rules, again, there is a general vehicle guideline section with rules that apply throughout the classes. So again, give those a read through, that you're not doing something that isn't allowed, period, regardless of the class. So again, read those and then we'll take a breakdown in here into Class 2. Getting started over here, again, some things have pretty much just carried over from the previous rule sets. They're just a little more defined now. Gates are a minimum of 12 inches. Now, yes, they can be wider. Gates have to be a minimum of 12 inches. So, as always, mind your width when building and choosing axles and offsets. No dig or rear steer or selectable over-under drives is allowed in Class 2. If you have one or either of those in your Class 2, they have to be mechanically locked out, not just unplugged, mechanically locked out so they cannot engage. Tires for Class 2, here's a little bit of a change. So tires now for Class 2 have a minimum and a maximum. Minimum height now for Class 2 is 4.2 inches, which is just above the Class 1 maximum. And the maximum tire diameter for Class 2 is still 4.75 inches. And the tires are based off manufacturer specifications. If the tire does not have a listed manufacturer specification on it, the tires will be measured at the tech table. You can start modifying some tread patterns and stuff like that. Tires cannot be cut and shunt or made up of different tires. They have to be one tire all the way through. As well, for Class 2, you can have a truggy back, a two bed, or a flat bed, and each of them kind of have their own sections and their own rules to follow from if that is something you are interested in building. Cab only is also allowed in Class 2 as long as it is able to still meet the overall rectangle's parameters. So like if you're running cab only, you still need to make sure you're meeting center rectangle and all the widths are still appropriate. It is possible, it's just something that's going to have to be paid a little more attention to than it was previously. With Class 2, you can have axle-mounted servo or chassis-mounted servo. Either one is available in the front, and no windshield is required for Class 1. Next, we'll talk a little bit about bumpers here. So front bumper is still required for Class 1. A rear bumper is not required, but you can have one on there if you need additional scale points. Bumpers must be at least as wide as the respective rectangle parameters. Must have material at least as wide as half of the center section below the tops of the tires at full compression. Vertical height of the bumper material must be at least 3.2 millimeters. The specified requirement must be beyond the body and wheel rim lengthwise, and both for front bumper and rear bumper if you had it. Any portion that is above the top of the tire or beyond the body or chassis will not count towards the required specification of the bumper. So again, very similar to Class 1. You have to have your specified width of bumper, which is determined by your center section, which is determined by your track width. So all that has to be in relation to each other, and it has to at least be 3.2 millimeters or 1/8 inch thick or tall. And at full compression, it has to be below the top of the tire, and then it does have to extend past the body and the front edge of the wheel rim. Again, pretty simple on bumpers. Prior bumpers, the width was simply, it had to be wider than the chassis rails for Class like 2 and 3. But now it is determined based off your center section width, which is determined from your track width. So say your track width is 6 inches and your body is right at 6 inches, your bumper is going to have to be 3 inches wide. Something along those lines. Again, those just kind of coordinate hand in hand with each other. And again, we're talking a lot about track width. Just for reminder purposes, the front track width is measured top tire bulge to top tire bulge, and that is taken also at full compression. Now, a little bit here on the body here. So, for the overall body, must extend to the wheel edge, front and rear. So your body has to at least meet the edge, the front edge of your wheel, front and rear. So, however long your body is, it has at least, the front has to at least go to that front edge, and the rear has to at least go to this rear edge. And also, because I do actually have mine marked up, whenever you determine where your center section is, and we'll get to that in a second, wherever your center section is, so mine is right here to here, this section here at full compression has to be below the top edge of the wheel rim. So wherever the top of your wheel rim is, this section has to be below that, the entire length of the center section. So your center section is measured just how we did in class 1. You're going to go from the leading edge of your rear tire and you're going to measure it in 2 inches. And then you're going to go from the trailing edge of your front tire and you're going to measure it in 2 inches. So from here to here is my 2-inch mark, and then from here to here is my 2-inch mark. So this section right here, that is my center section. Again, not cab, that is my center section. And what it's looking for is something has to be there, whether it be body or slider, because yes, you can meet center section requirements with the use of a slider. So it means actually I do have a little more freedom. So actually everything below this line, I could cut off. Anything in this section, I could cut off as long as basically this square here is intact. This bottom edge will be below my wheels. And then right here at 2 inches, there is body or something of existence if I truly needed to, but I don't want to cut that much off. Next with body are some modifications. So prior in class 2, you could either pinch the front, dove the rear, or have both sides. You could have 2 of the 3 modifications. Well, now with the rules and the rectangles, so technically you can have all 3 modifications now, as long as your finished piece and finished body is still able to meet, fill all the rectangle requirements and the specifications, you can do all 3 of those mods. So technically, my front here is pinched and my rear is dove. So technically, I still could cut this bottom section off here because I would still have enough body and material left to meet and fulfill the rectangle requirements. So speaking of pinching the front, that rule for the front has changed a little bit. So for the front here, they're going to call this a taper in the rules. The front section can have a realistic taper or pinch from the center section to the front. The taper must be at least a straight line from the front edge of the center rectangle width to the front section width when viewed from above. Where your center section is, your corner of your center section, it means when you're cutting or your fenders and everything, it has to be a straight cut. I know how I've pinched some of mine in the past, and I know how I've seen others done, is we kind of did some ugly monstrosities like this, where we pinch it in, but then I basically just cut the fenders all the way off. So it's not a straight line. It comes down, goes in, and then comes out. So that is not an acceptable pinch based on the new rules. If I wanted it to be, this whole section would have to be straight all the way through. So I would have had to leave more on there and then cut it out, or not cut the fenders off. But that is specifically here in the front section. It does not mention anything for the rear. The width just has to be half the width of the center rectangle section. And here is a top view on the diagram. So here's what's talking about with your pinch. It needs to be a straight line from there if you do it, and then your rear is basically open as long as wherever it is the narrowest point is at least half the width of the center rectangle. A few more things on the body here, a couple things. So shock hoops in class 1, they have to be covered. In class 2, they do not have to be covered to run on course, but in order to receive skill points for your drop bed, if your shock hoops are coming through, the shock hoops do have to be covered to gain scale points. And like I mentioned in the previous video, you can simply cover the shock hoops with scale accessories, cooler, fuel cell, toolbox, or a tonneau cover. A tonneau cover works, again, both ways. The tonneau cover covers the shock hoops and allows you to gain your drop bed points. So win-win with just a simple tonneau cover. Just a little Velcro on the back of it so it can be undone, rolled up, the bed can be inspected to make sure it meets drop bed requirements, and closed, and to the course you go. In addition to the body, again, a little rule here that's not in the section itself, but it is in the hard body section. So in order to gain hard body points, which you can gain hard body points for front, center, and rear, each section individually and all together for a total of 12 points. The body in each section must fill the rectangle when viewed from above. Bodies with inset grills or other oddities where the body does not fill the rectangle between the fenders can be covered by the bumper, winch plate, vanity plate, cover to fill the void. So if you are going for full hard body points, again, keep in mind that your body still must fill the rectangle front, center, and rear. So, and the last little requirement here for the overall body, and this would refer to front, center, and rear. Again, this is just those sections individually depending on where your cab section actually exists. All 3 sections do have a minimum height requirement. So for the minimum height requirement, this applies again, front, center, and rear. When viewed from the side, the overall height of your body must extend at least to the tops of the tires at full compression. So at full compression, if you have a completely narrow and slam body, however tall your body is, it at least has to make it to the top of the tire. Now, the last part here we need to double check is our cab section. And like class 2 had previously, there is a minimum cab height requirement. For the new rules here, a cab is required, it must be at least 4.25 inches from the bottom edge of the body or sliders to the top of the body or cagework if the roof is removed in the section that the cab exists. A 2x3 horizontal section of body or cagework must be at or above the minimum height requirement where the cab exists. So again, wherever your cab exists, center, or if it's a unimog, something. So mine's like right here. So mine here, when I'm set to measure it, I'm measuring from the bottom of the body here to the top of the cagework because I do have the roof removed. So that area has to at least be 4.25 inches tall. And then when you're looking down at the roof, in your cab area, you at least need to have a 2x3 section, which I do here because the cage is kind of extended. I could have probably squished this down quite a bit more if I was thinking about it, but it was my first cage. I didn't exactly know what I was doing. I was just trying to meet my rectangle specs. So that right there is going to wrap up class 2. Pretty simple, straightforward, definitely still open. If not, I think it opened up a little more, allowing us to extend some body options and then our bumper requirements and stuff like that. Again, a lot of that's based on track width. So when you're all said and done, looking at your truck, making sure and seeing how everything's looking, what are you looking for when you're all said and done? Wherever your cab is on your body, you measure your cab. You make sure your cab is at least 4.25 inches tall. And then make sure your roof is at least 2x3 in the roof section to count for your cab. Then when you're looking at your body, you need to make sure your body at least extends to the front edge of the wheel rim and then extends to the edge of the rear wheel rim. And the next part, you're just going to verify in your center section. Just make sure wherever your center section is marked out. The tape does help just to give you an idea when you're trimming and stuff like that. Is just make sure within the 2 inches of your tire's edges, front and rear, towards the center, make sure there's at least body, make sure there's something there, whether it be body or slider, and then make sure that entire length of that center section, that entire length is below the top of the wheel rim, and you'll be good to go. And then again, just verify your overall width of your body. Make sure the center section, this center section here, is at least as wide as your track width. And then for bumpers, front bumpers required, or if you have the rear bumper for those initial scale points. For your bumper, just make sure you have a section of bumper that is at least as half as wide as your center section here, and that section is below the tops of the tires at full compression, and then make sure it does extend past the front edge of the wheel rim and body. Other than that, you're pretty much good to go and ready to rock and roll. And I said, the rectangles really, I think, overall intimidate a lot of people because it's a lot of information to take into. But when you break it down, throw in a few tape lines, you're like, oh, all right, it's not that bad. You're just making a couple measurements here and there, measuring in, making sure you're tall and making sure you're just as wide as your track width, and you're good to go. Because even, class 2 was similar before with the overall width of your cab. At some point of the cab, you had to make sure it was at least as wide as your track width. Same thing here, it's just now make sure it has to at least be that wide all the way through. So all in all, pretty simple. But as always, any questions, comments, anything like that, as always, put them down below. Do my best to get everything answered. Again, to the best of my interpretation, this is how everything's rocking right now. If there's any major changes or something's totally wrong, of course, we'll do some update videos, get everyone on the same and correct page. But in the meantime, I hope this video does help in some way, or at least, takes a little bit of concern out there, or even just breaks it down a little bit easier for you. So, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and until the next rectangle, everyone have a great one. Crawl on.